I buried my son last week. At the funeral, my 6-year-old daughter whispered, "Mommy, Liam said not to drink Grandma's juice." Everyone was mourning. I stood there, frozen, gripping the urn. My mother's hands trembled, but not from grief. Liam had always been observant. He kept secrets in that little notebook. I hadn't opened it. Until now. His final entry was just 6 words. "If I die, check the orange juice." That was the moment everything shattered. I thought I'd lost my child to illness. But what if someone in our family made sure I did? The summer I thought would heal us began with the scent of blooming lilacs and the crunch of gravel under my car's tires. After a grueling school year, I wanted nothing more than to give my children a season of rest, away from the crowded apartment and constant noise of the city. My mother's house sat on the edge of a sleepy town, a place I once believed was the safest corner of the world. To my children, it seemed like paradise, wide fields, endless sky, and a grandmother who always greeted them with open arms. Mildred was waiting on the porch, her silver hair pulled into its familiar bun, the kind that had made the neighborhood women call her the model matriarch. She hugged Ellie so tightly that the little girl squealed with laughter. Liam stood back, his arms crossed, the solemnity of a boy who saw more than he should. I brushed it off, assuming it was just his age, the fragile cusp between boyhood and something older. Inside, the house smelled the same as it had when I was a child: baked bread, polished wood, and the faint trace of roses that grew along the fence. It wrapped itself around me like an old blanket, and for a moment, I let myself believe we were safe here. My mother bustled around, setting out cookies, pouring lemonade, fussing over Ellie's hair. To anyone watching, it would have looked like a postcard-perfect family reunion. But then, as I sat at the kitchen table, I noticed Liam's hands. He had pulled his notebook from his backpack, scribbling furiously while everyone else laughed. When I asked him what he was writing, he snapped the cover shut and said, "Just stories." His eyes flickered toward Grandma, and I caught something there, something that unsettled me, though I couldn't name it then. The days passed in the rhythm of summer, Ellie running barefoot through the grass, my mother teaching her how to knead dough, me sipping coffee on the porch. It should have been everything I wanted. Yet Liam grew quieter. He refused the orange juice Grandma poured every morning, pressing his lips together until I coaxed him into a sip. Soon after, he would clutch his stomach and excuse himself from the table. Mildred would smile knowingly and say, "He's growing. Stomachs get sensitive at that age." Her words should have reassured me. Instead, they rang hollow. One afternoon, I found Liam in the attic, sitting cross-legged in a shaft of dusty sunlight. He was writing again, his small shoulders hunched. When I asked what he was doing up there, he closed the notebook and whispered, "Just needed some quiet." His eyes darted toward the stairwell, as if afraid someone might hear. That night, after putting Ellie to bed, I lingered outside Liam's door. The glow of his lamp seeped through the crack, and I heard the scratch of his pencil. I almost knocked, but something held me back. A mother knows when her child is carrying something heavy, but Liam had built walls even I couldn't climb. Ellie, on the other hand, remained her cheerful self, until one night, when she crept into my bed. Her tiny fingers clutched my arm, and she whispered, "Mommy, Liam told me not to drink Grandma's juice." I froze, my heart hammering. I asked what she meant, but she only shook her head and buried her face against me. The next morning, when I brought it up to my mother, she laughed. "Kids and their imaginations. Don't encourage nonsense, Clara. You'll just make them nervous." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. Still, a seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with every passing day. Liam barely touched the food she made. He flinched when she touched his shoulder, and once, when she poured him a glass of orange juice, I saw his jaw tighten before he muttered, "I'll drink it later." He carried the glass upstairs and returned minutes later with it empty, though his lips were dry. That evening, as I tucked him in, I noticed something odd. He held his stuffed bear, old, fraying at the seams, a relic from his toddler years, tighter than usual. He wouldn't let it go, even when I kissed his forehead and pulled up the blanket. I thought it was just comfort, but as I leaned down, I caught the faint sound of paper crinkling inside the bear. I asked him what it was, but he only turned away and whispered, "It's nothing, Mom." I didn't push. I should have. When I left his room, the bear was still clutched in his arms, its button eyes staring at me through the half-light. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just tired. But deep down, something in me knew. Liam was hiding a truth he couldn't yet say aloud. And whatever it was, it had to do with Grandma. I drove back to the city after the first week of summer, promising the children I'd return soon. Work called, and I trusted my mother more than I wanted to admit. She had raised me, hadn't she? She had the quiet country house, the time, the patience I felt slipping from me in my 38th year. Liam didn't complain, though his eyes lingered on me longer than usual as I kissed him goodbye. Ellie waved, cheerful as always. My mother stood on the porch, her hand raised in farewell, the perfect grandmother framed by white curtains. That night, I called to check in. The FaceTime screen lit up with my mother holding the phone, then shifting it to Liam. He looked different. His eyelids drooped, his speech slowed. "Hi, Mom," he murmured, his voice heavy as though speaking through water. I laughed nervously, asking if he was tired. My mother's voice cut in, firm. "He's fine, Clara. You worry too much." The next morning, I told myself I would drive back early. But work pulled me into meetings, and by the time I could leave, my mother had already called. "Don't bother, dear. He's just resting. Children have spells like this." Something in her tone froze me, yet I swallowed my instincts. 24 hours later, the phone rang again, this time from the hospital in my hometown. Words blurred together: high fever, seizure, liver failure. By the time I arrived, Liam was gone. I stumbled through the hospital corridor like a shadow. My mother sat in the waiting room, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, surrounded by murmurs of sympathy from nurses who knew her reputation. She reached for me, but I pulled away. My child was dead. I could not feel her touch without revulsion. The funeral came swiftly. Mildred orchestrated every detail, the flowers, the music, the photographs, insisting she knew best. When I objected, she snapped, "This is not the time for hysterics. We will honor him properly." She refused to let me request an autopsy, whispering that grief made me irrational. Family members nodded in agreement. I felt outnumbered, silenced. On the second night, after the mourners had gone, I crept into Liam's old room. His backpack sat neatly in the corner. I opened it with trembling hands. At the bottom lay his notebook, worn at the edges, pages filled with his small handwriting. I flipped through entries of days and symptoms, until I reached the final one. 6 uneven words stretched across the paper. "If I die, don't let Ellie drink the orange juice. It tastes different." My vision blurred. The notebook slipped from my fingers and fell open on the floor. My son had known. He had tried to warn me, and I had failed him. Behind me, the floor creaked. I turned to see my brother Jackson standing in the doorway. He had not been home in years, estranged after a string of debts and fights with our mother. Yet here he was, dressed in black, his eyes cold. "Still playing the victim, Clara?" he sneered. "Even now? Liam died of natural causes, and you're already inventing stories. Don't you dare drag Mother's name through the mud." I held up the notebook, my hands shaking. "He wrote this, Jackson. He knew something was wrong. He was afraid." Jackson snatched it from me, flipping through the pages with a scoff. "Children write nonsense. You want to blame someone for your neglect? Blame yourself. But don't you dare accuse her." His voice rose, echoing through the empty house. And for the first time I saw not an estranged brother, but another guardian of my mother's fortress. The argument carried into the hallway, our words sharp and unforgiving. My mother appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale in the lamplight. "Enough," she commanded. "We have mourners downstairs. Show respect." Jackson fell silent at once, while I trembled with rage. Later, when the house quieted, I returned to Liam's room to retrieve the notebook. It was gone. Panic surged through me. I searched the bed, the drawers, the floor. Nothing. Then I looked at the shelf where Liam's stuffed bear usually sat. The space was empty. I sank onto the bed, clutching the quilt, my chest tight. That bear had been with him since toddlerhood. He had clung to it the last night I saw him alive. And now, in the middle of his funeral, it had vanished. Was it stolen? Hidden? Or had Liam, somehow, left me another message inside it? The questions clawed at me, each one sharper than the last. My son was gone, but the silence he left behind was screaming. The third week after Liam's death felt like an unending descent into fog. My grief was no longer tears. It was confusion, scattered memories that did not belong to me, fragments of childhood nights I could not quite place. I had lived my entire adult life believing I simply had a poor memory of being little. Now, as I flipped through old medical records I had dug out of my mother's desk, the truth bled through in black ink. Prescription slips, tiny dosages of antipsychotics, my name written on lines meant for children. The dates matched the years I could never remember, ages 3 to 6. My hand shook as I held the brittle paper. The nausea in my gut was not just from grief, it was recognition. My own mother had drugged me, numbing my mind, wiping out the earliest years of my life. The room spun. I heard the echo of Liam's voice, faint but insistent. "Don't let Ellie drink the juice." I stumbled outside, clutching the records like proof of a crime no one else could see. Across the street, Mrs. Walker, the retired nurse who lived alone with her dog, called to me. She had been at the funeral, but too quiet, too watchful. Now she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Clara," she whispered. "I didn't want to speak then, but I've seen things. At night, when I walk the dog, I've seen your mother at the kitchen window. She puts drops into the children's cups. Not vitamins, not medicine." My blood froze. "What kind of drops?" Her eyes darted toward the house. "Dark liquid." She stirred it fast. Once, I even saw Liam spit into the sink like he was trying to get rid of it. I thought, maybe it wasn't my business. But then, she faltered, regret etched into her face. I didn't wait for her to finish. My pulse thundered in my ears. I ran back inside, past the photos of smiling grandchildren on the wall, into the bedroom where my father's old belongings were stored. My father, quiet, kind, dead at 45 of liver complications. We never questioned it. My mother said it was bad genetics, an unlucky turn. But what if it wasn't? I dug through boxes of faded shirts and old journals until I found the hospital file. Liver failure. Unknown cause. Abnormal traces in blood work, the same words I had heard about Liam. For hours, I sat there, surrounded by dust and ghosts. My family history was unraveling. Not illness, not accidents, a pattern, a poisoner. I thought of confronting her then, but fear anchored me. Instead, I carried the files to the dining table where the relatives still sat. They were drinking coffee, murmuring condolences. My mother rose when she saw me, a warning gleam in her eyes. "Look at this!" I shouted, slamming the files down. "My father didn't just die. Liam didn't just die. She did this!" Gasps filled the room. Jackson rose instantly, standing at her side like a loyal soldier. "She's delusional. Grief has broken her." My mother touched her pearls, her lips trembling with practiced fragility. "Clara, darling, you need help. I've been so worried about you. Everyone sees it. You don't sleep. You say strange things. Now you're accusing me? Your own mother?" The room tilted. Their eyes turned toward me, some with pity, others with suspicion. Gaslight. The same suffocating tactic she had always used. Only now it was amplified by the crowd, by my own brother's voice joining hers. I shouted until my throat burned, but my words felt brittle against her calm. At last, Jackson pushed me out of the room. "Enough! Go lie down before you embarrass yourself further." I stumbled into the night air, choking on disbelief. How could truth be invisible when it was etched in my son's final words, in my father's medical charts, in my own stolen childhood? Ellie found me hours later. She was pale, trembling, clutching her stomach. "Mommy," she whispered, "it hurts." Panic slammed into me. She hadn't eaten anything from my mother's hands that day. I had watched carefully. Yet her lips were dry, her breath shallow. I rushed her to the hospital, terror gnawing me alive. The doctors frowned, baffled. Mild dehydration, they said. Minor traces of toxin in her system, but nothing she had consumed recently could explain it. I pressed them for answers, but they had none. As Ellie slept beside me, an IV drip in her arm, my mind spiraled. How could she be poisoned when no one had touched her food? Unless the contamination was deeper, hidden in something we hadn't even considered. I stared at the ceiling, consumed by dread. Something was happening inside this family that defied logic, and I realized with bone-deep certainty that I hadn't reached the bottom yet. Ellie's voice came like a dagger slipped quietly between my ribs. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, legs swinging, eyes fixed on the floor. "Grandma told me to help," she whispered, fingers twisting the hem of her nightgown. My throat tightened. "Help with what, baby?" "She gave me a gray candy. She said to drop it in Liam's juice when he wasn't looking. She said it would make him sleep and be quiet." Ellie's lip trembled. "But I didn't do it, Mommy. I was scared. I hid it under the rug." I froze, nausea clawing up my chest. My daughter, my sweet, innocent child, had been turned into a weapon. My mother's hands weren't just poisoning the children. She was twisting their trust, making them accomplices to their own destruction. I pulled Ellie into my arms, forcing my voice to stay steady. "You did the right thing. You're safe with me. You don't have to do anything Grandma tells you anymore." But inside, my rage was volcanic. When Ellie finally slept, I paced the room, every nerve raw. My mind thrashed for proof, something undeniable, something that even Jackson couldn't dismiss, something that would rip through my mother's lies. That's when I remembered Liam's bear. I tore through his belongings again, refusing to believe it had vanished completely. And at last, in the lining of the old toy, I felt something sharp against my fingertips. I slit the seam open with scissors and out slid a USB stick no bigger than my thumb. Hands shaking, I plugged it into my laptop. The screen flickered, and then Liam's small, shaky voice filled the room. "I'm making a video," he whispered. The camera pointed at the kitchen table, where a cup of orange juice sat. The image wobbled as he hid the device behind a stack of books. A moment later, Mildred entered. She glanced around, pulled a dark vial from her apron pocket, and poured 2 drops into the juice. She stirred quickly, then set the glass back down, smiling as though nothing had happened. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. Proof. Hard, undeniable proof. My son had left me his testimony. He had seen what no one believed. He had died trying to protect his sister. The fury inside me ignited into something cold, sharp, and unstoppable. I whispered aloud, though no one was there. "If everyone calls me insane, then let them. I'll show them the truth." The next day, I played a different role. I smiled at my mother, accepted her tea, let her believe I was broken, ready to reconcile. I even kissed her cheek and said, "Maybe you're right. Maybe I just imagined things." Her eyes softened, victory glinting within them. That was when I slipped my phone onto the counter, recording every word she said. Later that evening, as I replayed the conversation, Jackson walked in without knocking. He must have heard enough because his face was pale. "What the hell are you doing, Clara?" I snapped the laptop shut. "What does it look like? I'm collecting proof. She killed my son. She tried to kill me when I was a child. She's trying again with Ellie." Jackson leaned against the wall, arms crossed, but there was a flicker in his eyes, recognition, not disbelief. "You think you're the only one?" he said bitterly. The words caught me off guard. "What are you talking about?" He let out a hollow laugh. "When I was 13, she made me take pills, said they were vitamins. Turned out they stopped my hormones from kicking in. She didn't want me to grow up. She was terrified I'd leave her, like Dad did before he died. For years, I couldn't figure out why I was different from the other boys. It was her." Silence settled between us, heavy as lead. For the first time in decades, I saw not an enemy, but a fellow prisoner. "She destroyed both of us," I whispered. Jackson's voice cracked. "And now she's destroying our children." We sat there in the dim light, two broken siblings bound by the same mother's grip. For the first time since Liam's death, I felt less alone. Jackson leaned forward, his eyes hard. "If we're going to stop her, we do it together. But we have to be smart. She's built a whole life around looking perfect. We need to rip off the mask in front of everyone." I nodded slowly, my rage sharpening into resolve. I had the video, the recordings, the notebook. He had his story, his scars. Together, we would dismantle the fortress she'd built brick by brick. The battle line had been drawn. The morning I handed the evidence to the police, the air felt different. For weeks, I had lived inside a nightmare where no one believed me. Now, with Liam's video, Ellie's confession, and the old medical records, the tide shifted. The detective's face hardened as he scrolled through the footage. "If this is genuine," he said, "your mother won't walk away from it." By afternoon, the news had spread. Headlines flooded local television. "Beloved grandmother under investigation for child poisoning." My mother's perfect image, years of charity work, Sunday church appearances, the smiling matriarch, began to fracture in the public eye. Neighbors whispered, reporters gathered outside the house. Some refused to believe it, calling it slander. But the video was undeniable. When officers came to arrest her, she didn't fight. She adjusted her cardigan, lifted her chin, and walked out as though attending a social function. The mask was still intact, even as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. Ellie clung to me, trembling, while Jackson stood stiff at my side. The trial became a spectacle. Reporters filled the courtroom, cameras flashing. I sat at the witness stand with shaking hands, describing every detail. The notebook, the poisoned juice, the way Liam grew weaker every day. Then the prosecutor played the video. Gasps rippled through the room as Mildred's smiling face appeared on screen, tipping dark liquid into her grandson's drink. Her lawyer argued desperation, illness, a fractured mind. But my mother broke her own defense. Rising to her feet, she glared at me and Jackson, her voice cracking through the courtroom. "You ungrateful children! Everything I did was for you, for them. They were mine. Mine! You betrayed me!" Her words shattered the facade. This wasn't grief. This was possession, twisted into obsession. The jury watched, wide-eyed, as the mask finally slipped away. But the case didn't end there. The defense requested a psychiatric evaluation. The judge agreed. Was she criminally insane or fully aware of her crimes? The question hung like a blade above us all. If deemed insane, she might escape true justice. The waiting was unbearable. Weeks of testimony, expert witnesses, medical evaluations. I replayed the video every night, terrified the system would fail us. Jackson grew quieter, the old scars between us reopening as we relived our childhood. Ellie asked questions I couldn't answer. Why would Grandma want to hurt us? Didn't she love us? At last, the verdict arrived. The psychiatrist declared her competent. She wasn't insane. She was manipulative, calculating, fully aware of her actions. The jury found her guilty of second-degree murder and child endangerment. 25 years in prison, no parole. The judge's words cut through the silence. This sentence reflects not only the crime, but the pattern of coercive control and abuse inflicted over decades. Mildred collapsed into her chair, her hands shaking, her hair falling loose from its bun. For the first time, she looked small, almost ordinary. Yet when she turned toward me, her eyes still burned with fury. "You think you've won, Clara," she hissed, "but they will always be mine." I refused to look away. "No," I said. "They're free." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras caught my every word, my every tear. The headline the next day was brutal and final. Grandmother sentenced for poisoning grandson. Love turned deadly. Life did not magically heal. Jackson severed ties with the remaining relatives who defended her. They chose her over us, he muttered. For once, I didn't argue. He was right. I focused on Ellie. I enrolled her in a new school far from the town's gossip, giving her a chance to start fresh. I signed papers granting me full, undisputed guardianship. For the first time in months, I felt like a mother again, one who could actually protect her child. Yet at night, when the world quieted, I still saw Liam's face, his small handwriting, his whispered warnings. He had saved us all, though he hadn't lived to see it, and I couldn't escape one haunting thought, the one that echoed like a challenge inside me. Could I ever forgive someone who claimed to love us, yet killed to keep us? The weeks after the sentencing were strangely quiet. For the first time in my life, my mother's shadow no longer stretched over me. Yet, silence is deceptive. It carries echoes of what came before. I woke some nights with my chest tight, convinced I would hear her voice in the hallway. But when I opened my eyes, there was only Ellie, curled beside me, safe. I needed to turn the weight of what happened into something more than grief. So I built a website, a small forum at first, where parents could write anonymously about suspicions in their own families. I called it Whispers in Orange Juice, after Liam's warning. The stories poured in, accounts of controlling grandparents, gaslighting siblings, parents who poisoned with words instead of vials. For every message I wrote back, I told them they weren't alone. I told them I believed them. Ellie began therapy. At first she was silent, folding herself small in the corner of the office. But slowly, with gentle sessions, she began to speak again. She talked about Liam, about the gray candy, about the confusion of loving someone who terrified her. Her counselor called her brave. At school, she started making friends, her laughter returning like sunlight through storm clouds. Jackson kept his distance from me at first, wary of reopening old wounds, but one evening he visited, manuscript pages tucked under his arm. "I've been writing," he admitted, setting the stack on the table. It was his story, years of pills, confusion, the sense that his own body had betrayed him, when in fact it had been our mother's manipulation all along. He titled it Stolen Youth. For once, he didn't look like the angry boy who had left home years ago. He looked like a man reclaiming himself. Together, we combed through the old files again. That was when I found it, the second recording hidden on the USB Liam had left. At first, I thought it was just another shaky clip of the kitchen, but as the video played, I heard my mother's voice, hushed, almost prayerful. "They never last," she murmured. "The babies, the husbands. I do what I must to keep them close, but they always leave. Just like the first one. My little boy. He didn't survive, no matter what I gave him, so I made sure the others would never leave me again." I dropped the laptop lid, my stomach twisting. She wasn't just guilty of Liam's death. She had confessed, unwittingly, in her own solitude, to poisoning another child, a baby no one spoke about. The family had buried the truth decades ago, calling it a tragedy, a stillbirth, an accident. But here it was, undeniable. I debated whether to release it. Did the world need more proof of her monstrosity, or was it enough that she would spend the rest of her life behind bars? In the end, I uploaded the clip to the forum, anonymous, letting it speak for itself. The response was overwhelming. Survivors wrote that hearing her voice validated years of suspicion about their own abusers. Liam's courage had reached further than I ever imagined. Months passed. I sold our apartment, packed boxes with trembling hands, and told Ellie we were moving. She didn't ask why. She only said, "As long as you're with me, I don't care where." We chose a small town where no one knew our names. New school, new job, new rhythm. I signed the lease under a different last name, a quiet act of rebirth. But I carried one thing from the old life. A small orange tree in a clay pot, its leaves bright against the windowsill. On the rim of the pot, I taped a strip of paper with 5 words Liam would never read. "This fruit doesn't kill anymore." Some mornings, I water the tree and watch Ellie laugh on the porch. The scars will never vanish completely, but they no longer define us. My mother's legacy ended in a prison cell. Ours begins here, in sunlight, with roots that grow clean and true. When people ask why I spend so much time on the forum, why I answer every desperate message, I tell them the truth. Because once, a child's voice was ignored until it was too late. I will not let that happen again. And when I close my laptop at night, I whisper into the quiet, "Thank you, Liam. You saved us. You still do.